Here to discuss the future of global and domestic democracy, please welcome Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. Here to lead the conversation is The Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg.
So it seems like a tough crowd for you. Yeah. We had Kellyanne up here in the morning, so it might go a little bit easier for you, but not by much. We'll try to keep it lively. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for coming to the Atlantic Festival. It's nice to see all of you here. Leader Jeffries, thank you very much for coming. You're a regular at this, and we appreciate it. Let's just talk, before we talk about some of the huge issues facing us, especially in the next 45, 50 days. Yeah. Let's talk about some things in the news right away. The Lebanon beeper attack leading to, do you think it's leading to an escalation toward total war between Iran and Israel? Where do you come down on this question of whether it was a wise thing to do?
Yeah, first of all, it's great to be here with all of you. Great to be with you, Jeffrey. Great to be with Lorraine, the entire Atlantic team, and each and every one of you. Listen, it's been a challenging situation on the global stage. We've seen this in the context of the Middle East, what's happening in Gaza, as well as, of course, in other hotspots across the world, particularly Ukraine. I think there are two things that are happening right now in the region. One, I fully support President Biden's efforts, along with Vice President Harris, to arrive at a peace agreement in Gaza. We need to make sure that we can free the hostages, that we can surge humanitarian assistance into Gaza for Palestinian civilians, and that we can find a path to a just and lasting peace.
Does a Jeffries peace agreement in Gaza keep Hamas in power?
I think that what needs to one, Hamas, which perpetrated a brutal attack, should no longer be in power. And of course, Israel's objectives in that regard are the right thing to do for the country, given just the brutality and Hamas's sworn declaration to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And they've obviously acted upon it. The peace agreement that President Biden has put forth would involve transitioning to new Palestinian leadership, partnering, of course, with moderate Arab states like Egypt and Jordan, which have had peace with Israel in one instance since 1979, in another instance since the 1990s. This can be done. We also have to, of course, strengthen the economic opportunities for the Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank. Arrive at a situation, I support a two-state solution. We've got to make sure that you've got a safe and secure Israel living side by side with a Palestinian state that provides dignity and self-determination.
Seems farther and farther away than ever.
I think it's been a great challenge for decades, and presidents have come and gone. No one's been able to make the type of progress that I think we all would like to see, but we can't walk away from it. In terms of what's happening, on Israel's northern border, Hezbollah is a very dangerous, Iranian-backed proxy group. And I think tens of thousands of people have been displaced from the northern border in Israel, and that dynamic is going to have to be worked out. I was with Secretary Austin yesterday, and he made clear that, look, we have to do everything possible to avoid full-scale, all-out war. That won't work out well for anyone. And President Biden is continuing to lean into that objective.
So do you think that the attack, the beeper attack, while tactically clever and impressive, was strategically dumb on Israel's part?
Well, I don't know what prompted the attack, but it's basically been, a ongoing skirmish that has been taking place between Hezbollah and the IDF forces shortly after October 7th. It hasn't gotten a lot of the attention, but it's been active and it's been back and forth. And as a result, you've got people, innocent Israelis on the northern border who've been displaced. And it's untenable for that to continue to exist along with the people who've been displaced.
Do you
in the
agree
southern
with
part.
Do you agree with President Biden and Vice President Harris that the withholding of certain arms from Israel is a legitimate way to modify Israeli behavior?
I think that, as President Biden and Vice President Harris have said, we've got to make sure, one, there's a special relationship between our two countries. And Israel, of course, has the right to defend itself, and our commitment to that is ironclad and should be ironclad. At the same time, in the context of Israel's right to defend itself, we have to make sure that they do so in a manner that minimizes and or eliminates civilian casualties, because the count has been significant, and that's been well documented.
Okay, but would you withhold weapons?
Well, I think our view is that when we allocate weapons not simply connected to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. It's got to be connected to the broader dynamics in the region, which is very dangerous. And you have a situation where you have Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Iran with nuclear aspirations threatening to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. In that context, you can achieve peace, but you've got to achieve peace through strength. So, the administration is going to do what they have to do. They haven't explained any perspective to us as to what Congress has allocated and what they choose to hold back. And the overwhelming majority of weapons, often defensive, right? David's arrow, sling, Iron Dome. These are things that save lives and minimize casualties on both sides of conflict.
I'll take that as a kind of soft, no, I don't agree.
Yeah.
Speaking of peace through strength, let's talk about Ukraine. We can move to the politics of Ukraine in a minute, but one of the fascinating things about your district, which is in the best borough of New York City, is that...
That would be Brooklyn, y'all.
Yeah, I just had, yeah. That was not a plug for Staten Island. No offense, I don't need that. But you have the largest, we believe, the largest Russian native-speaking population in your district, any district in the country. And I'm wondering how those many thousands of constituents have shaped your view of this. Obviously, very famously, you, in the course of saving Mike Johnson's speakership, and we'll get to that, you got through a very substantial aid package to Ukraine. So talk about your feelings about Ukraine, why it's so important to you, what you're learning from your constituents, and what you think Donald Trump would do if he becomes president.
Yeah. Well,
that's your homework. That's a lot of essays. Sorry, but go knock them off.
Well, in terms of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, we've got to push back against Russian aggression. Our view, as we were working through making sure that Ukraine had what it needed in order to defend its territorial integrity, but also the values that all of us hold dear, was absolutely essential. And they've fought a valiant battle against a brutal enemy, and it's been ongoing now for 2+ years. The partnership with the United States has been important, and that must continue. The way in which many of us looked at the national security legislative battle was that this was a Churchill or Chamberlain moment. A Churchill or Chamberlain moment. We either confront aggression or we appease it. And appeasement never works, particularly when you have a brutal type of dictator who's at the helm, and that would be Vladimir Putin. The other thing that was clear to us is that this is an existential conflict in the world between the forces of democracy and the forces of autocracy, the forces of freedom versus the forces of tyranny, the forces of truth versus the forces of propaganda. Ukraine stands on the side of democracy, freedom, and truth, and so should the United States of America, and that's what we've been doing.
Talk about your constituents a little bit. Yeah. I'm curious.
And, in terms of the district, I have the honor of representing one of the most diverse districts in the country. Actually, it historically has been the 9th most African-American district and the 16th most Jewish. I have a good friend, Leon Goldberg. He tells me all the time, Hakeem, You got the best of both worlds. And I absolutely do. It's a great honor in that regard. And within, the Jewish diaspora within the district that I represent, I have the honor of serving the entire spectrum, within the Jewish community. So that's the secular Jewish community, the Reform Jewish community, the conservative Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community, the modern Orthodox Jewish community, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. And
you have a lot of meetings.
So it's incredible. And more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union. I represent Brighton Beach and the Coney Island Peninsula. More Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union, including Ukraine, than any other member of Congress in the country. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries, who knew?
America's awesome, isn't it?
Awesome. America's awesome. Brooklyn's awesome. And so in that context, right, other than defending those values that we talked about, democracy, freedom, truth, and pushing back against brutal Russian aggression, it was deeply personal for many of the people that I represent, whose families, whose hometowns, whose livelihood, in many ways, they felt directly impacted because of what was happening in Ukraine. And we were determined to get this done, and we found a path forward to make sure that America got it done.
I mentioned Mike Johnson. Let's talk about him for a minute. You're the leader of the more functional caucus in the House right now, and
that would be an understatement.
And famously, I'm trying to keep it neutral, right? Famously, you related to the Ukraine aid bill, you came in and rode to the rescue rather than let them flame out again and possibly lose a speaker after just a few weeks. You're in a kind of a same position now. He has an uncontrollable far-right faction. We're going to see you riding in anytime soon to save Johnson again?
Well, with respect to the question of the Ukraine funding and its connection to the second motion to vacate, we came to the conclusion after a prolonged journey of several months of the funding not making it to Ukraine and that having, real on-the-ground consequences in terms of the battlefield and the progress that the Ukrainian people had made pushed back significantly as a result of the delay. And the far right, as you indicated, Jeffrey, threatening, to vacate Mike Johnson, were he to go down this road and enter into a bipartisan agreement with us. And so we did come to the conclusion that under normal circumstances, the chaos, the dysfunction, the extremism, the mess that you see on the other side of the aisle, y'all work it out on your own. We'll be here to govern responsibly, right? When you work through your dysfunction. But in that particular instance, where really the values, the rules-based society that had been built, led by America in the aftermath of World War II, were all at risk if Ukraine faltered. And we weren't there to support their righteous effort. And so we concluded that, if the extremists on the other side try to vacate Mike Johnson because he decides to do the right thing and enter into a bipartisan agreement with us to meet America's national security needs, that we're not going to let Marjorie Taylor Greene win when the objective is for America and the free world to win. And that's the conclusion that we drew.
Okay. But what's at stake now is not something as momentous as the future of the free world. It's continuing resolution. Obviously, it's important, keeping the government functioning, keeping the budget going. doesn't sound like you're going to bring the same level of oomph to that effort that you made the last time. Is that fair?
It's fair to say that we evaluate these battles on a case-by-case basis. But I do think, you locking in on the moment that we're in terms of the government showdown is important because this is kind of like a Yogi Berra situation. He once made the observation, it's like deja vu all over again, right? Deja vu all over again. Only Yogi Berra, the great philosopher and baseball player, but government shutdowns are in the DNA of the Republican Party. And that is what we are confronting once again. If I made the observation recently on the House floor, to suggest that Republicans might really try to pull the trigger on shutting down the government is not hype, it's not hyperbole, it's not a hypothetical, it's historically grounded. If you go back to the 1990s, Newt Gingrich shuts the government down, and their extreme ransom demand at the time was that they wanted to end Medicaid as we know it. And they make these extreme ransom demands, and if you're unwilling to pay it, they shut the government down. And we're always going to stand on the side of the American people. So they shut the government down in the 1990s. Then in 2013, 14-day government shutdown. Tea Party forces John Boehner to do it. And the extreme ransom demand at the time was, we want the Democrats to agree to repeal President Obama's signature legislative accomplishment, right? The Affordable Care Act, which is benefiting tens of millions of people in a variety of ways. Thanks, but no thanks. So they shut the government down for 14 days. Then, about 5 or 6 years after that, in 2018, as you may recall, that was the beginning of the longest government shutdown in American history, 35-day government shutdown. And the ransom demand then was, we want taxpayers to fund Trump's ineffective medieval border wall, notwithstanding the fact that in 2016 he said Mexico was going to pay for it, right? No, we want taxpayers to spend billions of dollars to fund this medieval ineffective border wall. And if you don't do it, we're going to shut the government down, and that's what they did. Now, the irony of that particular government shutdown is that it began in December of 2018, and then it carried over into 2019. But in December of 2018, Donald Trump was the president. Republicans still controlled the House and the Senate. In other words, they shut themselves down. This is how much it's in their DNA. And so the extreme ransom demand right now is, if you don't agree to allow us to jam parts of Trump's Project 2025 agenda down the throats of the American people, we're going to shut the government down. And our view is that we will never, ever pay your extreme ransom demands. We will always defend the best interests of the American people.
I want to talk about cats and dogs for a minute, and electric sharks.
Yeah.
Famous dance from the 80s,
Right,
electric shark. So Trump is a 78-year-old man who incited a violent insurrection against the Capitol. He's a convicted felon. He's civilly adjudicated rapist. He spends much of his speeches, a great amount of time, insulting people, talking about pets being eaten, talking about whether it's better to be killed by a shark or by an electric battery, talking about windmills and how they cause bacon shortages. Why is this a toss-up?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's a serious question.
Yeah.
What is going on in this country that is a toss-up? I'm not talking about her positive qualities or negative qualities, Kamala Harris. I'm just talking about, how do you explain this to yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think obviously if this was a national popular vote election, Kamala Harris would clearly be on her way to winning. And and she's going to win the popular vote and by millions. But the reality of the situation that we confront is, one, it's an electoral college dynamic, so it's going to come down to a handful of battleground states, some of which are, red-leaning states, like a North Carolina, traditionally Arizona, for instance, or certainly Georgia falls into that category. And it's just a narrow path for either party. And you've got a situation where there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. You have the Trump base, and then you have some misinformation built in on top of that. And you've got swing voters that don't necessarily pay attention to the day-to-day goings-on of what Trump may be saying or even what we may be saying, and lock in at the 11th hour. And then it becomes a question of how can you get them the accurate information.
But with all due respect,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still, even in a popular vote, there's still, 48, 46, 47. I mean, it's not that it's not a 60-40 thing.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, what could she be doing differently, or the Democrats be doing differently, that would highlight some of the obvious things, some of the obvious dynamics that I'm referring to?
Well, let me say that it is a closely divided America, and we can't run away from that fact. That's the reality of the situation. And Trump is the Republican nominee, just by default, has a significant number of Americans who are prepared to vote for him. And it's going to come down to how we move swing voters in our direction. I do think that if you take a step back, over the last few election cycles, 2022, 2023, the special elections that have occurred in 2024, that the Democratic brand is in a stronger position, and we've been winning races. Even in the 22 midterm election, we narrowly lost the House. But we narrowly lost the House in a context of high gas prices, high food prices, inflationary pressure, COVID fatigue, and lower presidential approval ratings than what I believe or deserved based on President Biden's accomplishments. But that spells red wave, if not red tsunami. And in past cycles, when you've had Democrats in complete control of the House, the Senate with the presidency, even with relatively popular Democratic presidents, for instance, Barack Obama, his first midterm election in 2010, House Democrats lost 63 seats. 63 seats. President Bill Clinton's first midterm election, Democrats had complete control of the House, the Senate, with Bill Clinton as president, 1994. We lost 54 House seats and the Senate at the same time. And so you look at the 2022 cycle, we narrowly lost the House, only lost it by 5 seats. 100 million people voted in the midterm elections in House races in 2022. You take the 5 closest races that we lost and add together the deficit, together it was 6,675 votes. So it was incredibly close. We didn't lose the Senate, we gained a seat in the Senate. We won all of the governorships in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, flipped the governorship in Arizona, held the governorships in places like New Mexico and Kansas. We were all concerned in 2022, of course, that extreme MAGA Republican election deniers who were running for Secretary of State and Attorney General would win in all of these battleground states. They all lost. And unlike 2010 or 1994, when we lost hundreds of state legislative seats, we actually won state legislative seats, including flipping both houses in Michigan and 1 house in Pennsylvania.
Let me ask you one more question about this, because the road to your speakership, strangely, might run through New York State. Nancy Pelosi blames Governor Hochul for losing some of those congressional races a couple of years ago. Do you agree with her? And what are you doing in New York to gain the speakership?
So there's 16 districts that Republicans now hold. We only have to win 4, right? Net 4 to take back the House. 16 districts that Republicans now hold that President Biden won in 2020. So these are Democratic-leaning districts. 4 right now are in New York, 5 are in California. And so it's fair to say that we have to turn the situation around in both states. Now, we had a closer than expected governor's race in New York in 2022, but Kathy Hochul had just become the governor about 6 or so months, maybe a little sooner than that, but inside of a year, basically. And so, you know, she was put into a tough situation. She ran through the finish line. She did win. That was necessary. And she's been a great partner for us in rebuilding the state Democratic Party. We flipped a seat earlier this year in New York. It was a tough seat, but Tom Suozzi took our number from 5 to 4, one step closer to winning back control. And we've got other seats in New York that we have to win. And I believe that we'll continue to put the work in with Governor Hochul and Kirsten Gillibrand, who's been a great partner as well in terms of rebuilding the state Democratic Party. I'm confident New York is going to do what we need to do to make sure that on November 5th we take back the House.
Let me ask you one thing about that. Stipulating that the far right of the Republican Party causes more problems for Mike Johnson than the far left of your party causes for you.
Yeah.
You are a moderate dispositionally and politically. How much of a threat to Democratic recapturing of the House, how much of a threat is the left wing of your party right now?
Well, you know, we've been proud of the fact that throughout the 118th Congress, you know, from the left and the center, the New Dems, the progressives, we have it all in the House Democratic Caucus, right? We have the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the New Dems, the Blue Dogs, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus, the Women's Caucus, the LGBTQ Equality Caucus, right? But we embrace that because we believe, consistent with what the House should be, we're the most authentic representatives of the American people and reflect the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations, the fears, the concerns, the anxieties, and the passions of the American people. And so I think we can have active, robust, enthusiastic conversations about the best path forward, and I embrace that. But at the end of the day, what we've seen previously under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi, and we're trying to carry that forward, is that at the end of the day, we have to find the highest common denominator to make progress for the American people and deliver real results. And while that may leave some disappointed, understandably disappointed that perhaps we didn't go as far as some would have liked in a given policy area, that our history teaches us that we can always live to fight another day to continue America's march toward a more perfect union.
I have one final question for you, and it's the most serious question I think that you face or any leader of Congress faces right now. I want to know what specifically you're doing and how much time you're devoting to making sure that the Capitol and that the integrity of a legitimate election both are protected come January. The election is going to be close. Yeah. And if the past is a guide, Donald Trump, if he loses, is not going to accept that loss. What are you doing right now to make sure that we don't see that again?
Well, the first thing that was done, and this was incredibly important, was that the Biden administration, unlike the prior Trump administration, designated the January 6th certification as a national security event. So it will have the highest level of protection in terms of making sure you don't have a violent mob of insurrectionists trying to overturn the peaceful transfer of power, overrunning the Congress. And that's going to be an important distinction, that the planning, the engagement, the participation of law enforcement.
So if things go a certain way, we should expect the National Guard back in Washington.
Well, that's a possibility, and that decision will be made by the national security experts, by the law enforcement experts. What I would also say is that I think what is going to be very important is to make sure whoever is in the majority, right, because the new president is sworn in on January 20th. The Constitution requires the certification on January 6th. It also says the new Congress takes power on January 3rd. And so whoever has the gavels on January 3rd is going to determine, are we actually going to certify this election, or we're going to create chaos that perhaps throws the situation to the Supreme Court, and God help us in that particular scenario. And so our argument is we're going to work as hard as we can to partner with Vice President Harris and Coach Walz to make sure that they're elected. They're doing a tremendous job. Kamala Harris has hit the ground running in a phenomenal way. She's fighting for our future, our families, and our freedom. We want to make sure that Kamala Harris is the 47th president of the United States of America, and also make sure she has a governing partner by winning control of the United States House of Representatives.
And on that note, very cleanly done. Thank you very much, Leader Jeffries.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.